Actually, I'm really trying to hype up the energy here for this episode of the podcast, but I am feeling like a dead corpse right now, and it's not terribly pleasant. But today, we are going to break down most of UFC Lewis versus Spivak. I'm skipping the road to the UFC tournament fights because honestly, the entire road to the UFC tournament has been featured guys that I just don't think are going to last very long in the promotion. They're just not of that caliber. Now, in fairness, I say that about like entire crops of the Ultimate Fighter cast, and ever so often somebody completely befuddles me by actually being fairly good. A good example of this would be like Mike Trezano from one of the more recent seasons of the Ultimate Fighter. I didn't think he'd be good. And I still don't think he's mind-blowing or anything. But he had a pretty decent run that was well above what I expected. So maybe these guys will surprise me. They'll go on to do good things in the UFC. And we'll see what happens. But I'm not going to break down the fights, those trio of fights. Also going to talk about Bellator 290. We'll do that after the UFC for those of you who are not into the Bellator stuff. Not going to go through the whole card. But I am going to talk about the big fights, like the 5 biggest fights on the card that are interesting on both sides, because Bellator does have this tendency to have really solid fighters fight guys who are just not really going to test them, because the depth is not there in the divisions to give their top guys day after day after day challenges. So it's not the most competitive card, but it is pretty interesting. There are prospects and interesting fighters pretty much all the way down the card. I think you have to go like to the bottom 2 fights to find people that are not interesting. At least not right now. Maybe they'll be interesting in the future. They have like, I think, a combined I don't have to say how what I think they have. I can look. There's a 1-0 guy fighting a 3-0 guy. There's a 2-1 guy fighting a 2-1 guy. Maybe there's something impressive in the future there. We are talking about guys who are respectively 6 fights between the two of them and 4 fights between the two of them into their careers. So obviously things could be way cooler. And also Neiman Gracie versus Michael Lombardo was supposed to be on the card, which would have been a cooler fight than what we have as a result of Lombardo pulling out. So anyways, a couple of news items to say. I was asked a follow-up question on the whole towel conversation I had on the last podcast. The questions from the viewers podcast. Same viewer or same listener, I should say, because I do believe she consumes on Spotify, asked me to talk about the role that gender maybe plays in the whole towel throwing in thing. Because, of course, in fairness, Lauren Murphy getting her ass kicked generated talk about the towel throw-in more so than Glover Teixeira getting bombed on for 4 rounds by Jamal Hill. And, I think it's a fair question to ask, does gender have a role in that? And I think it does. Now, here's the thing. This is not me talking about views on women versus men. I think there's definitely some people that you can talk about that with, because there are people who complain about women's fights not being stopped that do not complain about men's fights not being stopped. And whether you want to term that sexism or protectivism, I don't know. But I think there's also something else to think about here. Two things. Number one is that in women's MMA, there are more fighters, at least at the UFC level, that are not really capable of dynamic finishing capability. Lauren Murphy is a perfect example of this, is that part of the reason that I would have liked to see the towel get thrown in for Lauren Murphy, probably at the end of the second round, is that it was very clear that there was no path to victory. She has no dynamic power, massively surprising knockouts in her career, submissions out of nowhere. And this goes for women's MMA as a whole. There are less fighters that are seemingly capable of doing that. Therefore, there are going to be more fights where the losing fighter truthfully does not have a way to win. That does not mean that men's fights shouldn't have the towel thrown in. Ricardo Funch versus Johnny Hendricks is my go-to of an all-time whooping that should have been stopped. But that's the thing, is that when you have a fighter like, let's say, Jamal Hill, who has dynamic finishing ability, there's always that pathway to victory. If you have a guy like, let me pull up this upcoming Bellator card, for example. Like, let's say Neiman Gracie is getting his butt kicked by Dante Shiro on Saturday, but it's Neiman Gracie. He has elite jiu-jitsu. He has the ability to hit submissions like that, and there is always going to be that pathway to victory. There are comparatively few men who don't have some level of that in high-end MMA as opposed to the women's ranks. And I think it's just because, honestly, to a degree, some of it is a difference in physicality, but to a degree, it's also like the mismatches are more prevalent. Where women's MMA, because of the time frame that it's gone through, and the coaching quality, and the financial quality that allows for training to be pursued, just has more tremendous mismatches, like a Jessica Andrade versus a Lauren Murphy. So I do believe that you will see the average MMA fan want to see a towel thrown in more in a women's fight than a men's fight because of that. It's not because they're women, it's because of the dynamic of the fight. And then on top of that, this is more of a critique of like cornering in general. With men's MMA, you do not have the dynamic of the relationship with the corner, the romantic relationship, the beyond coach pupil relationship. Because if sure, Sam Alvey's wife is in his corner, but she's not his head corner. I can't think of an example of a male fighter whose head corner is a romantic partner. Whereas with Lauren Murphy, Joe Murphy, to my understanding, is not her head corner, but he's very much there, very much making decisions in terms of advice. Jim West with Aspen Ladd would be another example of this. Again, a case of a fighter dating the coach in that case, or Joanne Wood, being married to her coach, John Wood. That's the other thing, is that a lot of the time these conversations happen, it's because you have that separate from coach-fighter relationship in the corner that we got to talk about. Because, as my friend Byron said in regards to Lauren Murphy, man, it's uncomfortable to think that Joe Murphy, her husband, is watching that fight and thinking, this should go on for 5 more minutes. And obviously you got to have faith in your wife. And I get it. But at some point, there's also got to be a towel thrown in there. And that's got to be painful to watch. And then you have also, to be clear, you have the difference in quality of cornering. Because part of the Lauren Murphy fight that makes me want to see the towel get thrown in, and this applies to almost every female fight I've seen where I want the towel thrown in, is the advice shows how little of an idea they have for a path to victory. It is that good body language advice, or the "we believe in you, Lauren Murphy" advice. That's not advice. That's not telling her how to win the fight. That's building up her confidence and making her go out there, but like that's just 5 more minutes of beatdown. Anyways, next topic. Conor McGregor apparently is going to touch Coach Tough. It's, I would assume, going to be Michael Chandler, because I think the report is that Tony Ferguson says it's not him. And I've been advocating for a long time for the Chandler-Conor fight as a big fight, a winnable fight for Conor, winnable fight for Chandler as well, and probably the best use of Conor. That being said, I will say this. I don't enjoy, like Armin Saryukian and now Mateusz Gamrot have called out your boy Chandler, and his response has been like, I'm above you guys. And I mean, the truth of the matter is, not really. Those guys, like Gamrot, I think is top 10 right now. I think Saryukian is also top 10. And when you're looking at Chandler, it's like, okay, what are your top 10 victories in the UFC? And the answer is Dan Hooker at the time. But otherwise, beating Tony Ferguson, but losing to Charles Oliveira, losing to Justin Gaethje, losing to Dustin Poirier. Like, you're squatting on a rank. And I don't think that's a bad idea. I think the big money fight for him is Conor McGregor. That's the fight he should be angling for. That's the fight that makes the most business sense for him. But it is a bit weird that there are fans that are like, not willing to admit that he is squatting. And there's a lot of squatting going on at 155. Anyways, let's get to the fights here. So the main event of the UFC card, which again was supposed to be in South Korea, now at the Apex Center, starting at the unfathomable hour of 10 o'clock at night, Eastern Time. Derrick Lewis versus Serghei Spivac. Same height. Lewis is a little bit longer, 1 inch of reach advantage. I broke down this fight before, and I don't have a lot new to add. Essentially, here's the thing. Derrick Lewis is a fighter that I've always had a really hard time picking his fights because he has such a power advantage over a lot of people. He's incredibly strong. He's exhausting to grapple with. But at the same time, it seems like grappling with him would be a very, very good idea. And that's a trap that a lot of fighters go into. And that's probably a trap that Spivak himself will go into because he likes to grapple. He likes to wrestle. He likes to grapple. He likes to ground and pound. He likes to work chokes. So these are all things that usually don't work against Derrick Lewis. But I've been increasingly concerned with Derrick Lewis's durability because the thing that made him work is that he would get beaten up, remain able to fight on, and then apply his power. And I'm at the point where I don't think I'm going to pick it anymore. Because if we look at Derrick Lewis's recent record for a hot second here, it's kind of bad. It's getting melted by Sergey Pavlovich. It's getting melted by Tai Tuivasa. Yes, there's the win over Chris Daukaus in there, and the Cyril Gane fight is whatever it is, and he did knock out Curtis Blades. But the last two fights, I've just been kind of not impressed with his durability anymore. Like, I used to be very impressed with how tough he was, how much punishment he can take. And I'm not sure that that's there anymore. And that's why I am going to have to go with Serghei Spivac to pick up a TKO here. And I know that's not going to be the most popular pick. And hang on, who's the underdog? Lewis is the underdog, so I guess maybe that is the perfect pick. Spivak, I think, is a little bit too much of a favorite, minus 225 to 250. And then plus 175 to plus 200 for Lewis. I think that's maybe a little bit wide. And it wouldn't surprise me. It would absolutely not surprise me in any way, shape, or form if Lewis knocks out Spivak. Because it's not gonna surprise me if anybody does that. And Spivak is very hittable. He is a heavyweight, wrestle boxer. And none of them, save maybe Stipe, and not even Stipe, really. But maybe Stipe don't really have particularly great striking defense. So absolutely Lewis can win this fight, but I've got to go with Spivak. Da Un Jung versus Devin Clark. Jung is 4 inches taller, has 3.5 inches of reach. I still don't have the biggest faith in Jung. Like, he's fundamental in every way. He's a good boxer. He's hard to take down. He can grapple. He's strong. He has all the basic skeletal parts of a good fighter and actually a pretty top fighter. But he's not super athletic. And by the same token, he is a guy who went nip-tuck with Sam Alvey in a simple fight IQ question fight, and one that, at the time they had the fight, realistically he had every physical advantage of. Because Alvey was a fading guy who, sure, still had durability, still had a counter game, but realistically should have been workable around to get a very dominant victory. So that's the problem there. But the problem with this fight is that I have almost the exact same problems with Devin Clark. He's got okay boxing. He's got fairly decent wrestling. He's got some physicality. But when the biggest traits that really define him is tough and has a heart, it's a really bad sign. His only 205 finish is William Knight. He's incredibly reliant on just going deep into fights and taking a lot of punishment. I've got Jung by decision. Again, not sold on Jung. The difference, though, I guess, in a nutshell, is that Jung hasn't won me over yet. Devin Clark is someone that I actively am kind of done with. Not that he shouldn't be in the UFC, not that he shouldn't be fighting, not that he shouldn't get booked, Not that it's not going to be interesting to see him, but like he is defined as a gatekeeper. I know how good he is. I know what's good about his game. I know he has a screwed up cornering situation because his dad is in there and shouting. So I guess this is maybe like one of the few cases where like a men's fighter maybe has that relationship with the corner that goes beyond fighting, obviously. I know there's like a lot of fighting corners that, of course, incorporate family members and so on. Chris Weidman's dad, Stephen Thompson's dad. But his dad is very vocal and I think counterproductive. And also refuses to throw the towel in. Like this would be an example of a fighter that I totally have a couple of times thought maybe the towel should be thrown in. But yeah, Jung by decision. He's a plus 265 or plus 240 to plus 2 or minus 240 to minus 265 favorite, with Clark being a plus 195 to plus 209 underdog. So nothing's terribly controversial yet. My first underdog, though, will be this fight because Blago Ivanov is the underdog at plus 110 to plus 115, and Tybura is a surprising favorite at minus 130 to minus 146. Yes, Tybura is 4 inches taller. He's 5 inches longer, which is stunning. I don't really like this matchup because it's two dudes who are in their mid-30s that we know everything about that should be used to test other fighters. And Tybura just beat Alexander Romanov, and it feels like he should have had a bigger fight. Like that just is really what it feels like. But I also feel like Ivanov is a terrible matchup for Tybura. Because Tybura is all about getting the takedown, forcing grappling exchanges, and so on. And Ivanov is basically impossible to take down. Like his weakness is that he likes to counterstrike. He likes to box. He likes to throw power, but he's not necessarily that powerful, not necessarily that fast, not necessarily that explosive, and not tall. Like that's the other thing is usually his opponents can use the outside to work their reach and outside game against him. And Tybura doesn't really have an outside game. Like if we're being entirely honest right now, Marcin Tybura does not have a range striking game. He is going to consent to the range that Imavov wants with the thought or the hope that he can get this fight to the ground, either by getting the takedown or like the fight with Romanov, being able to out-scramble somebody. I don't think this is going to be a pretty fight at all. Like that's I guess the other reason I don't like it is I think this is going to be a sluggish, predominantly kickboxing affair between two guys that I don't particularly love watching strike at the best of times. But that's probably what it's going to be, and that's a fight Imavov can win. And I've got him by decision. Korean Superboy Doo Ho Choi is back against Kyle Nelson. Nelson is taller. He is longer by an inch in both things. I don't know why Kyle Nelson cuts down to 145. Like his big limiting factor is the fact that he has bad cardio and fights at a low pace. Like his ideal fight is trading power shots with somebody at outside to edge pocket range, working some clinch where he's strong and whatever, which I guess he can do at featherweight. I guess that part he can do. But at the same time, all of his cardio breaking down at 155, the solution is not to cut more weight. Now, and I mean, granted, he had to do something, I guess, because even at 155, 1-4 in his last 5. Losing to Matt Sales is just a really bad sign. He's just not very good. He's got power, he's strong, but and everything he does is actually relatively nice to watch. The form on his strikes is good. The form on his clinch is good. It's very clear that he knows what he's doing. It's just that he has no pace and gets tired. Gets tired fighting at a low pace. It's a really bad sign. The hesitation to pick Korean Superboy here is just that we haven't seen him. in a long time. He went and did his military service. He has lost 3 in a row to Cub Swanson, Jeremy Stevens, and Charles Rodin. Those are all fights that I think are fair, though. Like, Stevens was still physically somewhat there. Jordan is a crazy, crazy dude that is hard to keep up with. And Cub Swanson is still legitimately very good. Like, I'm amazed that he's still legitimately very, very good. But he is. And Choi fights at a high enough pace. He's not afraid of power, which is a long-term problem. Because he takes a lot of punishment with a wide open, non-existent striking guard. But, it's kind of most similar to a fight that he had with Sam Sicilia back in the day. And he won that. Like, again, Nelson, big hitter. Sicilia, big hitter. Both guys don't fight at a particularly high pace. They're both kind of used to being able to bully opponents and are at their best when they can do that. Choi's pretty strong, pretty physical in his own right. Unless ring rust becomes a really, really big problem, I see him getting the win here. I'm debating whether I think he'll finish him. I'll go TKO. I'll be bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about it. He's only a minus 174 to minus 190 favorite, which is nice. Nelson coming in at plus 134 to plus 160. And we lower ourselves down to a debuting fighter, Yusako Kinoshita versus Adam Fugit. This is my big underdog pick because Fugit's coming in at plus 250 to plus 275. Kinoshita minus 325 to minus 350. Fugit is, only an inch taller, but he has 5.5 inches of reach. I don't have my usual problem with Kinoshita that I have with Japanese prospects, which is that they usually tend to be kind of small for their weight classes because they cut notably less weight in Japan, in the Japanese regional scene. But I think he's of decent size. It's just that I don't think he's ready. He's 22 or 23, I forget which. Has a lot of submissions, but they're over particularly bad grapplers. Seems to have good striking power. His KOs are impressive enough. He likes to kick the legs. He likes to diversify his targets. That's good. He has a good counter game. I'm not wowed by his wrestling in any way. I think that there's an incredibly good base and that he'll be a very, very good fighter. He'll be a much better fighter than Adam Fugit long term. That's because Fugit's, 34 and a finished product. But Fugit has that level of creativity that'll catch out a young fighter. He does things that are not textbook sound, but that he makes work. He did give Michael Morales actually a really, really good fight. And Michael Morales is a very similar fighter to Kinoshita at a higher level because Morales is a freak. Morales has all of those good base things that I said about Kinoshita, but adds to it ridiculous physicality and a really, really good wrestling game. And Fugit was able to get him down. Fugit was able to handle him hang with him on the feet. He got finished, obviously, but the level has gone down here. You're taking a guy who, got finished in the third round, but was having a pretty competitive fight. And you're like, all right, here's a guy who's not nearly that athletic as the guy that just beat you and has the same kind of, I don't want to say raw because he's not as raw as Morales, but the same kind of lack of, still needs more seasoning. Super young prospect. And I just think Fugit's going to be able to get this. He's a good grappler. He's a solid wrestler. Again, his striking is not good ideas, but has natural power and hits from some weird angles. I think he'll put some zingers on Kinoshita and pick up the win here. To be honest, that's my big underdog pick because he's a plus 250 to plus 275 underdog, and Kinoshita minus 325, minus 350. That's too wide. Jiyoung Kim versus Manny Bohm. Not super excited about this fight. I've never really believed that Mandy Bohm is particularly suited to the UFC. Honestly, I don't think she has the physicality to make her game work. I've kind of found that Kim also doesn't. But Kim has kind of craziness and a willingness to throw volume enough that she'll probably take the decision. She is the favorite, minus 270 to minus 295. I know her run in the UFC has been quite bad on paper. I don't think any of the fighters that she's lost to are necessarily a problem. But we are talking about a lady who is on a 4-fight losing skid. Yes, it's to Jocelyn Edwards, Priscilla Cachoeira, Molly McCann, Alexa Grasso, and her wins are over Nadia Kassim, Melinda Fabian, a Justine Kish fight that I recall being very tenuous at best, and losses to Antonia Shevchenko and Lucy Pudilova. She is 3-6 in the UFC. It's amazing she hasn't been cut. But, I find her still to be a fun fighter. She's a mess, but Boom just doesn't have the power to make her pay for it. It doesn't have the physicality to make her pay for it either. Kim by decision. Jung Young Park, the Iron Turtle versus Dennis Tialunin. Tialunin made me eat my words when I said he would never win a fight in the UFC, and then he went out and beat Brad Pickett. But Brad Pickett is also like the bottom guy in the division. The guy who I think is just a waste of time putting people in there with. Tialunin is 3 inches taller, 4 inches of reach. But he's bad. Like, he's a fun action fighter. He will do stupid stuff. But he has no regard for defense. He has no regard for, like, imposing his will on the fight. Park is an excellent counter boxer. He has good boxing in general. He is a pretty good wrestler. He has good grappling and a top-rate nickname of the Iron Turtle. He's the big favorite here at minus 210 to minus 245. Tialunin's plus 170 to plus 190. I have Park submitting him. Tialunin is it's just bad. It's just bad. Please. This is the fight that I desperately want to be right on. Like, because every time Tialunin does well or wins in the UFC is another time that I question my grasp on any kind of fundamental reality that this sport has, because it shouldn't work. It should not work. Like, Tialunin has the type of style that, like, an Olympic level athlete develops, and kind of like a John Jones. It's kind of like John Jones's like style doesn't really work when divorced with it from physicality. Tialunin has that kind of style. It somehow has gotten him wins despite not being a super great athlete. And here we are. Here we are in his third or fourth UFC fight. I'm trying to remember. Yeah, he lost to Kizriev and he beat Pickett. Yeah. Please. Park is such a process driven fighter. I want him to have success. Tatsuya Taira versus Jesus Aguilar. Aguilar apparently has the smallest reach of any man in the UFC roster at 62.5 inches, which he's going to be 3 inches shorter and 7.5 inches with less reach than Taira. Taira is a prohibitive favorite in this fight, minus 1150 to minus 1600. Aguilar at plus 700 to plus 180 to plus 850. He should, like, to be clear, Taira should be the biggest favorite on this card. I just don't know if it should be that high. Aguilar is a fire plug of a guy, super powerful build, a lot of guillotine wins, fan of the club and sub tactic, but he's not an overly great grappler. He's not overly great at takedowns. He's not particularly amazing on the feet, and his lack of reach, of course, just compounds that. Tatsuya Taira is a guy who I had a hard time getting behind, because the problem is he had Japanese prospect syndrome. And what I mean by that is that a lot of the Japanese prospects that come into the UFC are guys that are flawed in the sense that they usually seem to fight at a slower pace than they probably have to in the UFC meta. And that their game tends to be kind of overly compartmentalized and not rubbing up against each other. They can do any one aspect of MMA very, very well at a time, but not necessarily a lot. And this is not, and I want to be super clear here, because when I have said this before, I have gotten some crap for like being anti-Japanese. It's not about them being Japanese. It's that's just kind of how that particular regional circuit functions. It's kind of like when I say a Brazilian guy comes in and he's a Brazilian wrestler. He's the guy who wrestles on a circuit with bad wrestling, or other things like of that nature. That's kind of it's just how the Japanese regional scene is structured. That is a little bit problematic for translating to MMA. But Tyra clearly can do it. Like, he showed up and he beat the brakes off of CJ Vergara. Was a little bit less impressive against Carlos Candelario, but won very, very easily. And it's just kind of weird that he's getting a debuting fighter off the Dana White Contender Series that didn't even really impress on Contender Series. So is this one of the rare times that the UFC is actually trying to build a stud prospect? He's very, very good. He's a magician on the ground. I love the flow of his grappling. I do still wish I saw a little bit more ground and pound. Maybe we'll see that. We'd see a little more last time. But yeah, my concerns about Tyra are kind of out of there. I still want to see a little bit more before I get like on the board of a top 10 run or a title run. But he is astoundingly good. Aguilar gives up his back quite a bit and doesn't really have a way of getting you off of his back. So I've got Tyra by rear naked choke. I think that's pretty easily, actually. I wouldn't bet on this fight because when you get into favorites of 4 digits, like, you just can't bet on that. So if you are looking for fights to bet on, and I'm not recommending that, I've always said if you're going to bet, make sure it's something you can afford to lose. Ivanov is my guy. He's an underdog I'm taking. Adam Fugit is my guy. He's an underdog that I'm taking. And you could probably do something with Iron Turtle Jin Young Kim or Jin Young Park. Pardon me. Jin Young Kim is the Fire Fist, which, by the way, both A+ nicknames. That also feels like pretty. Feels like that one could actually be a little bit wider. Let's talk about Bellator 290 here for a little bit. Ryan Bader versus Fedor Emelianenko. Final fight for Fedor. Going into retirement, hopefully. Going into the deep freeze, hopefully, because to be honest, I would have been happy if Fedor's career ended. Let me see if I can find the specific fight that I was done with Fedor. It was probably the Dan Henderson knockout in 2011. And at the absolute latest, it was 2016 when he lost, although on paper won a majority decision, with Fabio Maldonado. So when basically his whole Bellator run, in my opinion, probably should not have happened. Even though there's been some cool moments, like beating Chael Sonnen and Frank Mir and Rampage Jackson and Tim Johnson in pretty dominant fashion, actually. It's kind of weird. He's had a bit of a renaissance, but like, he's not Fedor anymore. He lost in 35 seconds to Bader before. I suspect this will go longer. I think that, he's in his last fight. He probably is really prepared for this one. I imagine that this was one of Fedor's biggest camps to try to go out on a high note. But as much as Bader is also getting to the end of his career, he's 7 years younger. Somehow Fedor actually has a 2-inch reach edge. That's a bit weird. Bader is the taller guy by 2 inches. Nothing has really changed. Like, it's been 4 years since they fought, but nothing's really, 3 and change. Nothing's really changed all that much. Bader still probably can defend against his power shots. He's the better wrestler at this point. Bader actually does make me legitimately a little bit sad because he's a guy who really started to transform just too late. He's a guy whose skill set really didn't start to come around until he was like 30. Like, up until then, he was just kind of like a power punching wrestler. And that took him really far. I mean, obviously, that took him to wins over Little Nog and Keith Jardine and Eric Schaefer and Vinny Magalesh to win the Ultimate Fighter, and Rampage Jackson during a particularly not amazing stance in his career, and Vladimir Matyushenko, but it also got him beaten by like Tito Ortiz, John Jones. Well, John Jones would have beat him anyways. Leo Machida, Glover Teixeira. And like, it was really like the late run in the UFC where he was fighting guys like Phil Davis, where we kind of really saw him do cool things and develop into like actually a pretty decent kickboxer who could defend and could attack on multiple different levels and actually became an interesting fighter. But by then the athletic upside had kind of faded away a little bit. So not a unique pattern, not a unique story at all, but one that comes across. Anyways, taking Bader, it'll last longer than the other one, but a TKO win is the most likely bet. He's a minus 320 to minus 375 favorite. Fedor coming in at plus 240 to plus 285. That could be wider, honestly. Johnny Eblen versus Anatoly Tokov is probably my fight of the night. Brennan Ward and Sabah Hamasi, but this one's fun. Tokov is always fun. Like he is a Russian fighter in the mold of an Alexander Shlemenko, in a sense that there's a lot of just absolute craziness to him. Like he can do everything, but he'll do stupid stuff as a striker, stupid stuff as a grappler. You're in for some kind of what the hell was that moment in this fight, but I'm picking Eblen to win a decision because Eblen seems pretty good, actually. You know, good level of physicality, solid wrestler, surprisingly good fight prep and fight IQ, adapting in fights. He does a really good job. Mind you, the chaoticness of Tokov might actually make that a problem. We'll see. But I'll be going with Johnny Eblen, who probably is easily the best middleweight outside the UFC. I really can't think of any real candidates otherwise. And I think he would actually do really well in the UFC. I think he's one of the guys who has been bandied about as like someone who could beat Alex Pereira. And I'm not necessarily opposed to that idea. Don't get me wrong, beating Gegard Mousasi is a much simpler puzzle than beating Alex Pereira, especially at this point in time. But at the same time, you know, he's definitely a guy who's like UFC caliber. He's like one of those, he is one of those Bellator fighters, and there's usually like, I don't know, maybe 5 to 10 of them at any given time that I absolutely could picture in the UFC doing really, 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 really good things. And right now that's like him, that's Corey Anderson, that's Vadim Nemkov, that is Neiman Gracie, probably Neiman Gracie. That is Rafael Stotts. That is Patchy Nix. Like all of those are guys that are like quite UFC caliber, in my opinion, in Bellator. But he's the favorite here, and it's close enough that you know what, you could throw a bet on it, minus 225 to minus 275, plus 170 to plus 225 for Anatoly Tokov. Homasi versus Brennan Ward. Homasi is 2 inches taller, 2 inches more in reach. I think I don't have it written down here. Did I screw up writing this down? Is it just that he's 2 inches taller? It might just be that he's 2 inches taller. Apparently, this is the third and only 3 fights on the main card. No, same reach, 71-inch reach. Okay. Both of these guys are super fun fighters. Like they're brawlers. They throw massive heat. They throw at times with absolutely reckless abandon. There is a lot to like in a fan-pleasing sense, but they're also incredibly hard-capped. But they can do a little bit of other things. Like they can grapple. Like they can both. They're not the kind of brawler guys that just get blanketed by other people and get made boring. Like it's almost impossible for this fight to be boring. But I do have to pick Homasi probably to pick up a sub at some point, because in Brennan Ward's case, there are like a history of like random submission losses. Like dude got heel hooked by Evangelista Cyborg Santos. That's not a good feeling. He got submitted by Alexander Shlemenko, who I mentioned before. That's not exactly a great sign. I'm not really comfortable picking him after 2017 because he had that long layoff and has come back and beaten 2 cans. Homasi is not a reliable fighter, but he is a good fighter at all times. He comes out to compete and do his thing and, had a pretty decent UFC run. It's one of those things where, like, probably prime versus prime, healthy versus healthy, apex versus apex. I'd pick Ward, but I need to see Brennan Ward beat somebody good again before I count on it happening. Because, I mean, even at his prime, he didn't beat a lot of particularly great fighters. Like, the high watermark for Brennan Ward is like beating Said Awad and Curtis Millender. Like, I'm not going to say Sabah Homasi is like tremendously above that, but there's a lot more structure to his game and nuance. I'll say that much. So, yeah. Homasi, super fun fight, though. Neiman Gray, odds. I forgot the odds. Homasi is the favorite, minus 188 to minus 200. Plus 150 to plus 165 on Brennan Ward. That's about right. Neiman Gracie was going to fight Michael Lombardo. Like I said, he's now fighting Dante Shiro. Dante Shiro's career highlight is literally getting submitted with the Lucanator choke. Don't get me wrong, guy beat Kenny Robertson, who's not a bad hand. He had a close fight with Logan Story. But I don't honestly think that he's very good, and I think you do actually have to be pretty good to beat Neiman Gracie. Gracie is a guy who has increasingly looked actually fairly at home as a striker. He is an amazing grappler, actually has pretty good takedowns, worth the price of admission just to see what he'll do. And you put him in there with a guy who got submitted with a Lucanator choke. I'm picking Gracie to submit him and do something cool, I hope. I have given up on the idea that Neiman Gracie is going to bring the Gracie name to, like, the top. Because there was a point where, if we look at his career, that I was really certain that he was going to be the first Gracie in a long-ass time to really do something. Like when he beat Ed Ruth, probably. When he, but yeah, I think there is a cap. The losses to Jason Jackson and Logan Storley, who are fighters I don't think that highly of. In Storley's case, I think it's just because I find him quite boring. Like that's his problem. Is that I can't really forgive him for that Michael Venom Page fight and even the Neiman Gracie fight. They both feel like really just kind of dull fights. And the loss to Jason Jackson, who is a guy who, maybe it's just the ass-kicking machine nickname that really has me kind of thrown off with him, but like is another guy that I feel like has made his bones predominantly over guys who just aren't really functional anymore and riding out decisions with Douglas Lima, particularly with Jordan Meehan, with Kenichi Kunimoto, with Benson Henderson in 2020, with Paul Daly. There's just a lot of like problematicness. Oh yeah, Kunimoto is Strasser Kunimoto. Yeah, he is. I knew that name. I had to pull up the profile to remember exactly who he was though. Yeah, Gracie to win, do something cool with a submission. He is the favorite. Although it's a pretty close betting line. He's only like minus 270 to minus 315. Shiro coming back at plus 205 to 231. Rematch between Lorenz Larkin and Muhammad Burkhamov. I feel like I don't have a different take after watching their fight. Larkin is really hard to take down and control. And Burkhamov had a hard time taking him down and control. Well, he didn't have a hard time taking him down. He actually took him down pretty easily. But when he got him down, he didn't do anything. Like, it was Danny Sabatello, Rafion Stotts type control. There wasn't really anything there. And I kind of end up having to take Larkin by TKO, and I'm a little surprised that he's a -1 or a +170, +188 underdog, and Berkhamov is a 215 to 235 favorite. I don't know. I've never been humongously impressed with Berkhamov. He's recently moved, I think, to Killcliff. And that probably means good things for the future, but like at the same time, Killcliff tends to be a gym that breaks you down before building you up. So I don't really believe we're going to see massive improvements yet. It's just not on their timeline. And of course, the first fight ended with the elbow to the back of the head, and Berkhamov was looking for a DQ finish. And don't get me wrong, I want to be clear on this. You take the DQ finish. You take it. You didn't get it because they deemed it non-intentional. But like this goes back to like the Diego Sanchez Michel Pereira fight, where like, do I think Sanchez pulled one out there and took a DQ win? Absolutely. Do I think he was entirely justified in doing it? Also, absolutely. And I think Berkhamov was entirely justified. But when you're going to go with a rematch, it does seem like you wanted out of that fight. Larkin's pretty angry about that fight, though. Maybe he'll make some terrible decisions, and Berkhamov can make that work. But I think Larkin finishes him. We also got Henry Corrales versus Ahmed Magomedov. Cool fight. Magomedov probably going to win. Steve Mowry versus Ali Isaev, I think is how it's said. I'm a big booster of Steve Mowry. I think he's a fun fighter. I think if he can put something together, he'll eventually taste Bellator gold. Chris Gonzalez versus Max Roshkov. I'm actually really looking forward to Grant Neal versus Carl Albrechtsen. I actually really like both of those guys. I've kind of always liked Albrechtsen. I don't really know who Pantera Diana Avsagoriev is. Gorova, pardon me. She's fighting Alejandra Lara, though. I generally enjoy Lara's fights, so again, like that's pretty cool. Darian Caldwell's on the card. Big fan of Darian Caldwell. Well, not a big fan of Darian Caldwell, but he's a good fighter. Yeah, like he's fallen on very, very hard times, having lost 3 in a row to Enrique Brizola, Leandro Higo, and AJ McKee. And of course, he had the 2 losses to Kyoji Horiguchi. But I mean, he's not that far removed from beating Henry Corrales and Adam Boric. So, like, still has some juice, still has some rub. Yeah, I mean, this is the far superior card. We don't usually get to see that from Bellator. But hey, I'm watching the Bellator card. I don't know if I'm going to watch the UFC card live. I might just be fight out, and also it depends on how much this lovely fever I have has cleared up. But we'll find out. Could still be a really big night of fights, as per usual. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for watching the podcast if it's on YouTube. If you look at the description, to the left, to the right, above, or below, you will find a link to my link tree. My link tree will give you my social media, my Facebook, my Discord. The Discord is really, I would say, the big deal. Because if you go into the Discord, you get access to the Mixed Martial Arts Simulator and the Pro Wrestling Simulator. And those are both really fun times. So check it out. If you want to kind of do like an intersection of RPG and mixed martial arts in a form of game. That's all for now. I hope you enjoy the fights, and I will see you next time. Well, Sunday, where I'll recap both cards.